I am excited next to introduce Clément, who's a good friend for many, many years. And we're going to have a fireside chat titled Lessons from Commercializing AI Research, Starting Deep Tech Businesses, and Building Artificial Intelligence Products at Fortune 100 Companies. But first off, I'm really interested to know, Clément, what's on the back of the whiteboard behind us there? Is that something that you want to share, or that is not something you want to share?
Hi, Evan. Well, first of all, it's great to be here. I remember the first time I met it in person at the LDV Summit back some 7-8 years ago, was it? So super excited to be back. And yeah, I just scribbled this thing that I thought was timely. I guess it's on everybody's mind these days, you know, are LLMs essentially going to take us to AGI? But we can come back to that later.
That's the right topic. Let's dig into that. First, let me give you a little everybody a little background on your impressive CV. You received a PhD from University Paris-Est and NYU, then co-founder and CTO of MadBits, which is actually when you and I first met. I think that was 10 years ago. I feel like I'm aging. I hope the longevity panel that we just had helps, because Marianne and I met 13 years ago and you and I 10. You sold that company to Twitter. And then you kind of co-founded Twitter Cortex within Twitter. You were there for about 3 years, and then joined NVIDIA as VP AI AV infrastructure, orchestrating AI training for autonomous vehicles. And actually a couple of days ago or a couple of weeks ago announced that you joined DeepMind as VP of research. So impressive accomplishments. But I would like to start, you know, in all these fireside chats, we start with kind of a little bit of the past, the present, and then the future. And there's a lot of researchers in the audience, and we invest in a lot of deep technical PhDs like Ryan, who just gave a keynote. You know, tell us a little bit about, you know, back when you were a PhD student, what did you think you were going to be doing in 10 years? And has it happened the way you thought?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. So back some 10, 15 years ago, when I started working towards my PhD, I think it was in 2008, I joined this essentially very small crew of people worldwide who were obsessed with neural networks and thought that neural networks would be the path to AGI. And back then, we didn't really use the term AGI, but we used AI in general. And I think there were maybe like 30, 40 people worldwide who thought that essentially scaling these neural nets would be a way to solve general purpose intelligence problems. And so, you know, I thought, you know, fast forward 10 years from that time, I was pretty convinced that I would have contributed some pretty key pieces to this AI puzzle. Did it pan out as planned? I'm not entirely sure. You know, I think I contributed some pretty important things in some of these large companies you mentioned. I think we still have a long way to go, but you know, every year is getting more and more exciting when on this sort of like exponential path to actually solving this problem. And it turns out that neural nets were indeed a key part of the puzzle. So I'm super happy about that.
Absolutely, a very key part of the puzzle. But what's interesting, you mentioned there, I mean, I think I'm sure I have this question, and maybe a lot of others in the audience have this question of, it's all a question of like time or expectation. How long might something happen if we're right or if we're wrong? And it sounds like you think it, you know, it might have happened sooner, or do you think it's happening slower or faster than you expected when you were a researcher?
Yeah, I think honestly, it's all happening faster than I expected. I remember back in 2008, 9, 10, a lot of the projects I used to work on back then were to build hardware accelerators for neural nets, because we all knew that the key thing to actually scale those neural nets were compute and the availability of great training data. Turns out that these things are extremely true and relevant today. Back then, you know, building these sort of like custom computers were key to making any form of progress. Then NVIDIA sort of like took over this entire industry and they leaped us forward by so much, right? It's almost like a time machine, right? Like, you know, we would have waited for like maybe 20 years to have enough compute and enough data to actually solve these problems. Everything happened way faster. And now I think in the past couple of years, we're realizing that by scaling those models on pure text input, we can actually learn extremely deep models of the world, which I think is surprising to many. And of course, it's still not completely solved. There's many other things to figure out, but I think it's happening faster by at least 10 years from my perspective.
That's great, because I always feel frequently it takes longer than expected, but I'd rather it happen faster, because then there's more iteration, more exciting things, and that thrills me. So another question about timing: how did you decide to start MadBits instead of joining a big company back then? Because that's also a topic that I speak with tons of researchers and PhD candidates, and why, or how did you decide to start MadBits, and what was it that you were building?
Yeah, that's a great question as well. So back then I couldn't figure out, I couldn't decide whether I was going to be a researcher and dedicate my life to actually researching some of these deep questions and figuring out these deep problems, or I was going to be an entrepreneur and actually start, companies and figure out a way to build products with that great technology and bring that to the market. I have this sort of like hyperactive nature, and so I like to be working on many things at once. And so it's hard to be a researcher when you have this mindset, because it requires more focus, doing one thing at a time and doing it really in depth. During my PhD, I actually started two other companies before MadBits, one around hardware, another one around software. And then MadBits was this sort of time where everything started make sense to me. I think I knew that we needed to continue investing in the deep tech, but some larger labs were going to do that better than a smart startup. But it was also the perfect timing for these technologies, especially visual neural networks, because most of the large companies did not have any technology to actually look at visual content, so images, videos, what have you. Those were largely invisible to them. So companies like Twitter, Apple, Facebook, even Facebook back then, they were just dealing with metadata. And so we thought that it was the perfect timing to actually build a startup that would actually build a visual search engine. And I got super excited about that. We went all in on that, spent 2 years building the core technology. And we had one sort of like first product that was this visual search portal. We indexed most of these social media streams, which back then were entirely public, by the way, which was really great. And that
where was that office? Wasn't that office that I visited you at? It was at East Village. Where was the New York City office, or was that in Brooklyn?
Lower East Side.
It was Lower East Side.
That was Manhattan, Lower East Side, and
I think there's like 5 of you in a small office for 2.
That's right, exactly. And actually, I just watched the previous talk, which was great, and looking at these sort of like custom built GPU rigs, we had the same thing. We built. I actually manually assembled the entire GPU rig we had. Everything was NVIDIA based. It was in the back office of that small apartment building, and we actually took down the electricity for the entire building like at least 4 or 5 times in the span of 6 months.
I don't know if when I was an entrepreneur, I don't know if Andy Parsons is in the audience. He now works at Adobe, but it was pre-cloud computing, and we were managing tens of thousands and eventually millions of images, of which we were training or running the servers in the office before we went to screw them into the co-location facility. And so Andy needed help, and there was only 2 of us. So that's part of every startup, I think.
Exactly. And to your previous question, I guess that's what I loved as well. This sort of like, as an entrepreneur, you start a company, you're going to be doing everything. You're literally going to be cleaning the floor of that apartment yourself, right? And you've got to.
It is true. I was the head sweeper for the hallway. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. So MadBits, in one sentence, what was it, and why did you sell it to Twitter?
Yeah, so MadBits was basically a visual search engine company, and we never quite got it to the market. Like, it remained as a closed beta. The reason for that is that as soon as we had a working prototype, this thing was so impressive, right? You could literally like search through extremely large bodies of visual content, images, videos, your own personal library. Like, we would index your own Apple photos. Like, we would get access to that and actually index the entire thing. We would do that on the web as well, mostly social media streams, so Twitter, Instagram. And we showcased that to a few executives, 5, 6 of the main companies in the Valley. And that was an immediate, we want to acquire you. We need to have that as part of our, backend. And so that's what happened.
And so when you joined Twitter, you built this team called Cortex Core. And I found an article, Twitter's new AI recognizes porn, so you don't have to. Is that, so tell me how that relates. And is that what you were hoping they were going to publish? I mean, sometimes good news, bad news, creativity of journalists. Was that what you were doing?
Okay, so that title is absolute clickbait. And we found that like when it actually got published, I remember like interviewing and talking about these technologies and be so excited about what we were building. And then this thing came out and it was like, come on.
I mean, it's unfortunate. Obviously, what you were building is much more powerful than that. But actually, it was part of what you were, helping to manage that content moderation, right?
No, absolutely. And so, clickbait aside, I think the article was actually spot on. And it turns out that one of the largest problems that these large scale sort of like social media platforms had at the time, and by the way, they still have that to an extent today, especially the ones that have been poorly managed lately, is.
I wonder which ones you're referring to, Clement.
Yeah. It's related, but yeah, I mean, so these platforms they have incredible, sort of like moderation challenges, mostly because a lot of them actually decided to centralize content moderation. So platforms like Twitter, Facebook, they all built around this idea that there would be some centralized entity that would sort of decide what can be showcased in public spaces versus what needs to be downranked. And based on that, you needed to rely on those types of algorithms to actually look into content and help filter out things that would make no sense, right, for the greater audience. So these problems were sort of like, gnarly and not so great to look at, but actually it felt good to solve them, because they really helped sort of like, make these platforms safer spaces. So I think, I'm glad we did it. The clickbait, not so great, but
sure. No, I understand. So tell me then, okay, so you're at Twitter, which is a big company. And then how'd you make the decision of switching or joining NVIDIA, another big company? Because, this kind of balancing act of early stage startups, you like sweeping, but versus big companies, it's a recurring question I have as your career has evolved, or as I've watched you as a friend evolve your career.
Yeah. I mean, so I love what we built at Twitter. The challenge is that I think the company fundamentally lacked technical leadership and vision in terms of what to do next. And around that time, I met Jensen Huang, the co-founder of NVIDIA, and we started having these long chats around, what is the future of AI. And by the way, it was like 6-7 years ago, and it really, like, we were basically describing what's happening today, which is kind of mind blowing. And I think Jensen always had this tremendous ability to see the future, at least on some kind of like 5-10 year horizon, and position all his investments so that they would become the platform for that. Boy, I mean, he succeeded at that. But back
it's amazing. Yeah, that's brilliant.
Brilliant strategy and alignment to what the industry actually needed. And so I got super excited about joining him and build something that was perhaps a little bit more fundamental. Context was the platform for AI at Twitter, but it was kind of like a side product. At NVIDIA, I think we had the opportunity to go build that for the entire industry and apply that to deeper technology problems like self-driving cars, for instance.
So that, as far as challenge and opportunity, huge. What was it, what you expected?
Yeah, so partly yes, partly some things not so much.
Right.
The part that I expected is, I think, the fact that NVIDIA is at the absolute center of this entire technology revolution we're going through. And you can look at every single startup that's doing generative AI or trying to apply AI to any of what we're doing today. Most likely, chances are they are consuming NVIDIA technology at one level of the stack. And so that part was tremendous. The thing I expected to build when I joined was really to start building a consumer-facing AI platform for NVIDIA. And it turns out that very rapidly, it became much more important for us to actually build an internal platform to actually support many new initiatives like self-driving cars, genomics, and so on.
Right.
And so I went back to becoming this sort of like background infrastructure team, and I think it was great. We built something tremendous that, by the way, is meant to continue scaling in the next years to come. Very proud of that. But I just felt like I wanted to go back to the product itself and be more connected to the applications we're building and how AGI is coming together as a whole. That's sort of like what led me to move on and explore new opportunities. But yeah, I think NVIDIA is a fantastic company, and I honestly wish good luck to anybody who is trying to compete with them.
Cool. I mean, I saw it was one of those things on when you announced leaving, there was kind of an in-between period, which I thought you might start a new company, but you decided to join DeepMind's. So talk about this transition. And, this is and I'm sorry to repeat the question because I think there's different stages of our careers. Obviously, from our bias perspective, as an investor, we want every entrepreneur to succeed. I mean, I was an entrepreneur for 18 years and I had successes and failures. And then each time an individual, a friend, a brilliant person goes in and out of big companies or thinks about starting a new company, it's always interesting to know or to learn how each other makes decisions. And so that we talked a little bit about that challenging decision because I think you love both the startup world and the big companies, but from Twitter to NVIDIA to DeepMind, it's 3 big companies in a row, right?
Yeah, no. So and that one at that moment, like when I transferred over from Twitter to NVIDIA, I had no second thoughts. I just, it was such a straight,
right.
Because the discussions with Jensen and how we saw eye to eye, that was such a no-brainer. By the way, while at NVIDIA, I actually also operated like an entrepreneur in some sense because we created this project called Rapid, for instance, which is NVIDIA's open source data science platform. We ran that very much as a startup. The way it started with Josh Patterson, who is now actually left NVIDIA and started his own company called Voltron Data. Quick plug to him. That was very much the spirit of starting projects from scratch, identifying a market. So we continued doing that. I think for me personally, what happened is that I left NVIDIA. I had a month of thinking things through. I took a 3+ months break, by the way. I actually started a company in that time frame, and I thought that that's what I was going to do. The company was focused on trying to automate this whole process of building data sets for the training of AI agents. I think it's one of our largest fundamental problems right now that needs to be solved at scale. The creation of these data sets is the most impactful thing to train great quality AIs. No one is tackling that well. There's many startups doing some related
There's
things.
a lot of startups trying to do that or say they're doing that, Clement, but I guess you're saying that it's still not being done well, huh?
It's an extremely hard problem. Arguably, even the great labs and companies like OpenAI, what have you, so much of that process is actually manual today. It's a lot of humans actually sort of deciding, looking at the failure modes and deciding what to do next, which works to an extent, right? We're creating better and better AIs like that, but we've got to be able to do better. And what happened is that, I had a chat with Demis, the DeepMind's founder and CEO, a long friend of mine. I actually worked for him 10+ years ago when I was still doing my PhD before MadBits. And yeah, I started describing where I was at, what I'm trying to solve, and he convinced me very quickly that I think DeepMind has all these great technology components. We're on the cusp of building something even greater, and I had such a great role as part of that. So I think the short answer is that I feel like if AI was not happening at that scale right now, I would probably be back to being a startup entrepreneur and figure out what to build next. Right now, the challenge is I'm torn because I'm so in love with the core technology and the sort of fundamental principles of scaling AI technology that I feel like doing it with those types of partners at that scale is where I need to be, basically. And that's what.
Perfect. I mean, it sounds like it's a very clear decision, but it's interesting that you dipped your toe back in the water, and
Yes.
maybe you had to do that in order to really know whether or not what was the right next step. Sometimes we have to, even before I started LDV Capital, I started another project and invalidated it quickly and started doing this. And I probably didn't know I had to scratch that itch to make sure that it wasn't the right thing to do.
That's right. No, and I actually really tried to from first principles, could I solve this alone? And I think the answer it was probably yes. I could have built something, but then there's this sort of huge trend coming now of these scaled foundation models, and I'm glad that there's a lot of the ecosystem now that's trying to reproduce that either in open source or with different strategies or producing more compact versions of that. But I feel like I want to jump into this core problem of are LLMs sufficient, or are we going to need more, and how do we sort of get to the next step here? I want to do that for a while.
Okay, so let's talk about that a little bit. Obviously, we've throughout today's session and a lot of the experts in the audience, we've been investing in people building businesses powered by visual tech and AI for 11 years, investing in generative AI for the last 5, which everybody says is crazy, but it just comes natural to us. And then next is, what you want to be working on. So give us a little bit of, as much as you can, insights into what you're going to be working on at DeepMind, or at least the challenges that you're excited to work on.
Yeah, by the way, just a quick parenthesis on the, being crazy with generative AI investments. And, back 8 to 10 years ago, I remember when DeepMind was founded and their goal was to solve AI. OpenAI a few years later had the same sort of
right.
And they all, everybody thought they were crazy, right? It's like, what are they?
I've gotten used to people calling me crazy. If they don't say we're crazy before we do an investment, we don't do it.
Yeah, no, and it turns out that these things are really consolidating now. So at DeepMind, I can't say too much yet, right?
Yeah, that's fine.
I just joined. We have a lot of things that we're planning to do, but I don't want to disclose some of these things too early. I'm just gonna say that we're at this time where I think LLMs is one key part of the puzzle. And LLMs, we call those LLMs now. They're really just scaled neural networks with this great transformer-based architecture that treats sort of like input streams as tokens. These models have demonstrated that trained on this huge amount of text data, right? They're able to sort of build an internal model of the world that's very satisfying and that can be used to actually query them, ask them questions. And so that's very impressive. I think we have lots of unsolved problems around that to actually build something that's more cohesive, complete, and actually capable of getting closer to AGI. And we're going to spend the next years, I don't know, 3, 5, 10. I don't know how long it's going to take us, but actually exploring the rest of the space, basically.
Cool. So why don't you talk a little bit about you as an entrepreneur? You've also worked in big teams. Have you noticed a clear what are the things that you would advise entrepreneurs or researchers that want to start a business or can't make a decision if they should start a business? Obviously, you're probably hiring more people, so we're not going to be talking about the people that you're going to be trying to hire, Clement. We're talking about how does the researcher, the PhD, make it the right decision to either start a business or go to a big company?
Yeah, that's, first of all, it's such a personal decision that I feel like at the end of the day, when I look at the way I made all my decisions throughout my life, you get input from people. It's good to get advice. It's good to have mentors. I always try to find a mentor to guide me through these steps. But at the end of the day, you make your own decisions. And I think it's very important that you make them based on some kind of deep first principles that apply to you.
There's one thing just to add to that. Sorry to interrupt. One thing just to think about. I think a lot of people feel like the decision is the last decision they'll ever make. It's the only choice they have.
Not at all.
And then until they make a couple mistakes or successes, you realize, well, hopefully we have a lot of different chapters in our career. But I think I've felt that many deep technical researchers feel like it's almost like it's binary. You have one choice or another. But I think it's an iterative process. Our lives is my view. But I don't know if that's. I'm not a researcher or an engineer. I just collaborate with a lot. So what do you think about that?
No, that's actually a better framing. So I think it's true. When you're younger, 20 plus, right? You're getting out of school. You feel like the decisions you're going to make are going to define, your entire career. And it's not true at all. I think we live in a world that's so dynamic, and you can actually experiment so much. You can go in sort of 3 to 5 year chunks. I think it's actually extremely important to do a lot of everything. When I started my company, I actually had no experience in big tech. And once I did, now that I do, I feel like I would be a much stronger entrepreneur, because I think you understand some of the way these large organizations work, the true state of technology. I think when you get out of grad school, you're so naive with a lot of these things, which is also your strength, right? Because you don't know what you don't know. So that sort of pushes you to do things that are a little crazy. I think I would say for researchers specifically, the only decision is, do you want to work on fundamental research for a good chunk of your career? Because if the answer is yes to that, I feel like you should stick to it. early on because it's very hard to get back in. Like if you start moving into business, creating companies, you're never really going to get back into fundamental research and getting to tenure, those types of things. That's probably an important decision. But if you're sort of like, dancing around between applied research in industrial context or building products, or I think you have so much freedom and you can go back and forth. You can spend, what each chapter is going to be one thing and you can go back to the next after. So I think you should be very experimental,
Makes sense. Makes
Yeah.
sense. What's your biggest mistake you made as an entrepreneur? Way back when, if you remember back that far, and what did you learn from it?
Yeah, I mean, okay, I made so many mistakes,
Yeah, just choose one. I mean, we all make mistakes. I mean, we learn from them, right?
I'm trying to be, I guess it's hard, like.
I'm not going to ask you only the questions I put on the list earlier, Clément. I got to ask other questions that, you have to think on your feet. You're real AI, right?
This one, no, it's a really good question. I feel like I made like 3-4 pretty major mistakes. One of them that I think was really annoyed me quite some time later is probably giving away too much equity early on. So the way we were structured, especially
to founders or to investors?
Investors.
Right.
And yeah, because I was naive, I didn't quite understand like the next steps. Back then, by the way, like 10, 15 years ago, there was much less sort of like street knowledge around, the whole rising process from seed, Series A. Now I feel like it's so codified that folks have a lot to read from. Back then, I think it was a little bit harder. And so we guessed a lot. And I think I did some things pretty off there that actually put us in a situation where it was better for me to exit early than really try to build it out. And I feel like if I hadn't done that mistake, I would probably have tried harder.
Yeah, I think that's a very important learning. But when you mentioned something, Clément, that I think is always fascinating. It wasn't, a lot of these things weren't codified back then. There wasn't a lot of information on the internet. And obviously there's some good and some bad information on the internet. But what amazes me is still a lot of people don't do their research before they ask questions, at least to have the understanding of what's the good and bad. And specifically, different, people from different cultures. It's just a different style. And what I love today is the opinions that we're getting from different keynote speakers and fireside chats and accents. We're covering, the whole globe, from South America to France to UK and others. It's a fun mixture. A couple more questions. We got like 2 or 3 minutes left, I think. What do you think is the best and worst trait of an entrepreneur in one word answers?
Worst trait is ego. Best trait is grift.
Love it. Cool. Give me one, what's your, 1 or 2 visual technology that you're most excited to finally appear or exist in 20 years?
Yeah, I think I got to go back to, so I spent the past 6 years building self-driving cars and building all the core technology for that. I feel like we made tremendous progress there. On that topic, I'm going to join you and what you said earlier, which is I think this field moved way slower than anticipated.
I think so.
LLMs, and text-based AI is doing the exact other way around right now. I think
it's true, but isn't it because of the human nature versus automobile? Like, I think the technology is there, but the automation is not there.
Yeah, I think it's also because, in some sense, self-driving, like driving a vehicle has such a safety challenge that it's almost an AGI complete problem, where you would want to have an agent that can completely understand and have a great world model of everything that surrounds it and can reason about it in ways that are extremely similar to the way we do it. Whereas today we're still sort of like brute forcing a lot of these layers. We've decomposed the problem and we're relying on scaled neural nets to solve a lot of that problem, which works great, but it's not quite taking us to the final finish line. Some other companies like Cruise and Waymo have solved this problem with this crazy expensive sensor platform, right? With a LiDAR, so many cameras, radars, building HD maps ahead of time. Thanks to that, they can actually solve the problem in very finite environments, like one neighborhood in Phoenix, one neighborhood in SF. The cost to actually scale to every other neighborhood in the world is insane.
Right.
So it's probably going to take us a decade plus to actually get there. And my sense is that in the meantime, we're going to have cracked some more fundamental pieces of that AGI puzzle that we can actually train the scaled world model, models, like something that's as good as LLMs, but for the visual world. And then start leaning on that to actually solve the problem. By the way, I would also say one more thing about LLMs. They got sort of like faster, but keep in mind that they do have the same type of like boundary conditions problems where you could not deploy an LLM today in a safety type environment. There's too much unknown. Like they're gonna do things that are basically bullshit sometimes, and you don't know when. And
you should definitely connect with Ryan from the last keynote. I don't know if you've spoken to him before, but what they're building at Damon sounds very interesting. What's one last piece of advice for researchers that want to build businesses as a closing statement?
That's going to be the same. I sort of like,
aside from going to LDV to partner. I mean, aside from that, right?
Talk to Evan for sure. He's a great guy. But yeah, I think the main advice is probably the one I gave to myself back then, which was find someone who loves products, loves building products, has an amazing product sensibility, like someone who's obsessed with, is that thing going to delight a customer, multiple customers? Because, your bias as a researcher is you're always going to be in love with the problem space, the solution space even. Like,
sure.
More than the problem space, the solution. How we're so opinionated about how to solve these problems. That was the thing about neural nets, right? Which helped a lot of companies like OpenAI and DeepMind with RL, for instance. But the problem is when you build a company, you've got to build a product that people are in love with. And so you need to find a partner like that. I think that's the key thing.
Very, 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 very wise advice, Clement. Thank you very much for joining us and sharing your insights. Stick around in the chat if anybody has questions, and hope to see you soon. Good luck at DeepMind.
Thank you, Evan. Great to be here.